Hello, how are you doing? I hope you're having a good day. I have a really big pile of exciting new books to show you and talk about. So these are all of the books. And so, yeah, quite a lot to get through, but I think they sound really exciting. See if I can put them down without dropping them all. Phew, no comedy dropping of the books in this video, at least. So these are books which publishers have kindly sent me, and some of them are ones that I've gone into a bookshop recently and bought copies of for myself as a special treat. But first, before I start talking about these books, I have a very, very special new book to show you, and this is the Manuscript edition of Paradise Lost by John Milton. This has just been published by SP Books, which are a French publisher that produce these beautiful editions, manuscript editions of books, where they reproduce the actual handwritten copy of a manuscript into a large format book, so you can see what the handwriting looks like and any corrections that were made. So, you know, this is a thing for really big book geeks that love this book and want to know more about it. And this is actually the only surviving manuscript of John Milton's Paradise Lost. It's from book one of his epic poem, which was first published in 1667. It was in 10 books, and then a later edition, a number of years later, came out when he revised it somewhat and added 2 extra books. And this is his account of the fall of man as told in the Bible, and how Satan was condemned to hell by God. And so it's telling that story through this epic poem. So you can see you slide out the copy of the manuscript, and then you open it up and see the handwritten book inside, and it also comes with illustrations by William Blake, and which, you know, dramatize this fall. And it comes with so there are only 1,000 copies of this being produced. So you see in the beginning it shows the number of the copy that you have. And yeah, it's just so amazing looking through this and seeing the actual handwriting of. They're not entirely sure if it's actually John Milton's handwriting or if he got a scribe to write it down for him. And there's a number of different corrections, which I think they say are in 5 different hands. So he obviously had a number of helpers working with them on this. But yeah, just so beautiful and so fascinating to look through. These editions are very expensive, so it's like a very special treat. But if you're a book lover that has a passionate interest in this book in particular, and I've shown other books on my channel that they've published, like the manuscript version of Mrs. Dalloway and F. Scott Fitzgerald's The Great Gatsby. So yeah, really fascinating to look through. Now, following neatly on from that very special book is a brand new novel called The Poet by Louisa Reid, and this is actually a novel in verse, which is apt because the main character is a writer, a poet, and it follows her story living in Oxford and how she has a relationship with a much older professor, and about the dysfunction of their relationship, how it's made up of this coercive control that he has upon her, and it's about class and privilege. And yeah, I think it's so fascinating to see a new book that's told in verse, and I'm interested to see how that works out, you know, whether it remains more lyrical or more narrative based or somewhere in between. Next is a new novel that a lot of people are talking about, and that's Lapvona by Ottessa Moshfegh. And this is a novel set in medieval times about a motherless shepherd boy and his relationship to the woman who raised him, who seems to have these kind of special abilities, but also the conflict he comes into with the lord and governor of the area and that governor's family. And it's meant to be quite a dark and twisted tale. As if you've read any Ottessa Moshfegh, you'll know what that involves. And I've read a couple of her novels before, and did really connect with them, and thought they were really fascinating and so immersive, and such a different kind of narrative voice than I read in a lot of other fiction. Although a lot of books now are being compared to Ottessa Moshfegh novels, but yeah, I'm so excited to read this new book. The Young Accomplice by Benjamin Wood, and this is a novel about two young adults who have just been released from jail, and they become apprentices for two architects, and these architects are intent on giving young offenders a second chance in life, but when they start working for them, things become slightly complicated, especially when someone from one of the young offenders' past re-enters their life, and yeah, then things get a bit messy. And I've read Benjamin Wood's novel The Ecliptic before, and really enjoyed his writing, so I've been wanting to read more by him, and this is his brand new novel. Seek the Singing Fish by Roma Wells, and this is a novel about a young girl growing up in Sri Lanka who has a special love for the natural world, but her life is thrown into chaos amidst the civil war in Sri Lanka, and she gets drawn into all of the turmoil of that. So it's following her story, and I've been wanting to read more about the lives of people in this conflict in Sri Lanka after I read Passage North by Anouk Arudpagrasam last year, and so yeah, I think this will give quite a different, much more personal perspective on this, because this is slightly removed from the immediate conflict, which is a really interesting perspective to have. But yeah, and I'm keen to read about someone that actually was directly affected by the conflict. Then I have a big group of new Irish fiction, and I always really enjoy reading new Irish fiction, so I'm excited that there's a whole batch that's just been published recently. First off, there's a novel called The Amusements by Aingeala Flannery, and this is a novel about a seaside Irish town which a lot of people go to in summer for the kind of amusement park there, and to go on the beach, and but the main character of it, she's always dreamed of leaving this place. She's never really connected with that lifestyle and feels quite distanced from it, and she wishes she was able to leave a school friend of hers who's been able to move out of Ireland and pursue her dreams and her artistic aspirations elsewhere. And it's about the break in their friendship and her mulling over what might have been. So, and I'm somebody that grew up in Maine, very close to a seaside town that had this kind of lifestyle, and so I think I'll really relate to and connect to the story. Next is Michelle Gallen's new novel called Factory Girls, and this is about a young woman who's a late teenager, and she's living in Northern Ireland, and she hopes her exam results will be her ticket out of the country and onto a different kind of life, because she's spending her time working really grueling hours at a factory doing manual labor, and but at this factory she learns about a secret going on in the background behind the scenes, which has to do with the sectarian conflict. So that's drawn into the story as well. And I absolutely loved Michelle Gallen's debut novel called Big Girl, Small Town. This was such a brilliant novel, and when I was a judge on the Costa Book Awards, we chose this as one of the books on our shortlist for the first novel category, and yeah, just such a strong voice in her fiction, and I think Factory Girls is going to be quite similar to that. It was very sad recently, the Costa Book Awards announced that they're ending the prize after 50 years of the award, which is really sad to hear. I mean, hopefully maybe a new sponsor will take up and carry on the awards, because yeah, they've been running for a really long time, and so yeah, that's a slightly sad thing, but yes, I'm very excited to read this new novel, Factory Girls. The Saint of Lost Things by Tish, Delaney, and this is a novel about a woman named Linda who's always dreamed of leaving Ireland. You can notice a theme now with these Irish novels, and she had at one point in her life left Ireland and was spent time in London, and but is living now back in Ireland decades after this, and has found herself sort of trapped there and stuck in this unhappy family dynamic where her father had always wished for sons, but he got 2 daughters instead. So it's following her story, looking back on what might have been. And I'd read this author's novel, which was her first novel, which was called Before My Actual Heart Breaks, which had this really melancholy tone to the story of a woman looking back on her life and pondering her relationship. And this sounds like a very similar in some ways. So I'm really eager to read it, because yeah, I think there's just such a beautiful tone to the story, though it is, you know, laden with melancholy, to that aspect of her writing I just think is so powerful. And then I have a new book of Irish short stories, which is called Hearts and Bones by Niamh Mulvey, and these are short stories which take place in the first 2 decades of the millennium, and a lot of the short stories involve people that feel like they have broken free of the shackles of the past, the ideas of how we're supposed to live, but then it's questioning like what do our lives look like now? And so it's really about contemporary life, and it's there are stories set between both Ireland and London, and so yeah, it sounds like a really exciting new voice and the author Sarah Moss is a fan. Speaking of fans, there's another new novel which is called I'm a Fan by Sheena Patel. So it's sort of playing upon our modern day life mediated through social media, but it's a narrative also examining a relationship that's unequal and slightly dysfunctional, and telling that story and examining why we still have a hold upon each other even though we know our relationship is bad for us and has gone wrong. And so looking at that story, and I love that this has such a compact little hardback book. It's published by Rough Trade Books, and so yeah, I really like the format of this. The Color Storm by Damian Dibben, and this is a historical novel set during the time of the Italian Renaissance, so the late 1400s and early 1500s, and it fictionalizes the life of a real historical painter called Giorgione, who was a very mysterious figure. Not much is known about his life, and he only lived till his early 30s and only produced sort of 6 or so surviving paintings, and his paintings have this real poetic quality to them, and he was a contemporary of Titian. And in this story it shows his life when he gets a commission to make a portrait of a rich man's wife, but then as he's drawn into the confidence of this woman, he learns more about what's going on behind the scenes and motivating this. And also there's a new pigment, a new color that he's kind of obsessed with and wants to paint with. So it's telling that story, and I just love a rich historical novel. So this sounds like very romantic and beautiful. Mama Day by Gloria Naylor, and Gloria Naylor was an American author who died in the year 2016, but some of her work is being republished and celebrated. She's probably most famous for the novel the Women of Brewster Place. But this novel, Mama Day, is set on an island which doesn't exist on any map, but which is sort of located between Georgia and South Carolina. And on this island, people celebrate their lost ancestors that arrived in America as slaves. And the central character, Mama Day, is imbued with the magical powers of conjure women. And so it's about her powers and her interactions with her family that arrive on this island. This new edition, published by Virago Books, comes with an introduction by Robert Jones Jr. that wrote the brilliant novel, The Prophets. So I'm really keen to read his introduction as well as reading this author for the first time. Then I have two books which I think are kind of a fun pairing with each other, which is a nonfiction book and a fictional book, because they have themes and ideas which I think will be sort of interesting crossovers. So there's The Book of Minds by Philip Ball, which is a nonfiction book examining the minds of animals and how traditionally we've thought about like the consciousness of animals in relation to our own human minds, and that's a kind of unfair comparison because they have different ways of sensing and perceiving and living in the world. And I've always been fascinated by the phenomenon of consciousness, because it's such a mysterious process. What's happening in our minds and how our brains function in terms of how we perceive the world. And so this gives a new perspective on the state of consciousness and minds in by examining these animals, and then as a consequence of that, of the way our own human minds work. And then what I think will make a nice pairing with this is this new collection of short stories by Naomi Booth called Animals at Night. And these are short stories, a lot of which are about people who feel these kind of connections with animals, and from like a mother who's staying up late night to nurse her child and sees through the window an animal, and there's just like a brief moment there where we can feel like there's a special connection we have with the animals we see, even though we have no idea how those animals are perceiving us or what they're thinking or what is going on in their minds. So yeah, I think it'll be really fun to read these two books alongside each other. Fun, in a really geeky, bookish way. A new collection of essays, which sounds so good, called Don't Let It Get You Down by Savala Nolan. And these are essays all about the intersection between different kinds of experience to do with race and class and with body image and shape, because the author talks quite candidly about how she is someone who is mixed race, so has never entirely fit into one category or another, and has also experienced different kinds of economic privilege and also depravity in her life, so knows those two different lifestyles, but has also had many different body shapes as she's grown and changed over time, and so doesn't conform to any one kind of like idealized form of body shape. And so yeah, she talks about these different experiences and how it's impacted her life, and how celebrating how nobody really fits into these neat categories in life, and I think that's such an important message. So yeah, it sounds like a great book. And finally, I have two new books, which coincidentally are both about different British musicians. So first is a collection of poems called Came the Lightening by Olivia Harrison, who's the widow of George Harrison of the Beatles, who died 20 years ago. And these are poems commemorating his life and his experience from Olivia Harrison's perspective, and also includes a number of photographs and some unseen before of the couple. So there's a really beautiful one of them together here. And it also includes an introduction by Martin Scorsese, so that's really interesting to see, and it's just a really beautiful edition of the book. And finally, there's a new nonfiction book called The Punk Rock Politics of Joe Strummer by Gregor Gall, and it's examining the life and work of Joe Strummer, who is the frontman of the punk rock band called The Clash, who through their songs really articulated a lot of the issues affecting Britain during the time concerning alienation and exploitation and multiculturalism in the country. So it draws upon the songs and the lyrics that he wrote, as well as some interviews with him and interviews with his contemporaries and people he knew, to examine his life and how the country was changing during this time and how they were responding to it. So that sounds really fascinating too. So those are all the books I want to talk about, but let me know if you've read any of these books, or if you're interested in reading any of these books now in the comments below, or if you've received any or bought any new good books recently, or borrowed any new books from the library that you're really looking forward to. I'd love to hear about that as well. But hope you're doing well and reading good things, and I'll speak to you again soon. Bye-bye.